June 1944. As Allied forces storm the beaches of Normandy, another invasion begins across the world, one more brutal, more intimate, and far more apocalyptic. On the island of Saipan, American soldiers land not just to capture territory, but to pull the war's front lines within striking distance of Japan itself. But what unfolds is not a clean advance. It is a brutal reckoning. In just 3 weeks, over 29,000 Japanese and 3,000 Americans will die. Thousands more civilians, men, women, and children, will perish by their own hands. Why did the battle for this small island spiral into one of the most tragic and defining clashes of the Pacific War? And why did it turn even hardened Marines into witnesses of horror they would carry for the rest of their lives? This is not just the story of a military conquest. It is the story of a psychological collapse, a cultural collision, and the moment that the Pacific War transformed into something far more total and far more terrifying. By the end of 1943, Imperial Japan is on the defensive in the Pacific. After defeats in Guadalcanal, Tarawa, and the Gilbert and Marshall Islands, Tokyo's high command declares a new line of defense, the Absolute National Defense Zone, anchored on the Mariana Islands, Saipan, Tinian, and Guam. This line is meant to protect Japan's vital sea routes, outposts, and most of all, the home islands themselves. Losing the Marianas would be catastrophic. They are not only military outposts, they are Japanese colonies. Saipan and Tinian have been under Japanese control since World War I, and tens of thousands of Japanese settlers now live there, alongside the indigenous Chamorro and Carolinian peoples, who have been marginalized and displaced. For Tokyo, the Marianas must be held at all costs. For Washington, they must be taken or the war cannot be won. Why? Because Saipan lies within striking range of Tokyo. If the Americans can capture the island and build airfields there, they can launch long-range B-29 Superfortress bombers against the Japanese mainland. It's not just strategy, it's geography. There are only so many islands with runways long enough, and Saipan is one of them. The task falls to the 5th Amphibious Corps, commanded by Marine General Howland Mad Smith. The assault force is massive. 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions, 27th Infantry Division, backed by the U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet, led by Admiral Raymond Spruance. Altogether, over 95,000 American troops are mobilized for the operation. Planners designate 4 landing zones on Saipan's southwest coast: red, green, blue, and yellow beaches. The attack is designed to hit hard and fast, pushing 1.3 kilometers inland on the first day. But the terrain is unforgiving. Coral reefs ring the shore, the beaches are narrow, and looming above is Mount Tapachau, a steep ridge that provides a commanding view of the island. Whoever holds the high ground controls the battlefield. To overcome the reefs, the Americans rely on LVT's tracked landing vehicles and decide to land deeper inland than usual. Marines will ride the LVTs straight off the beaches and into Japanese territory. It's an unorthodox choice and a risky one. Facing the Americans is a garrison of 32,000 Japanese troops under General Yoshitsugu Saito and Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, the same commander who once led the attack on Pearl Harbor. But this is not the proud fleet Nagumo once commanded. Japan's navy is fractured, supplies are scarce, communication is disjointed, reinforcements are limited, and often sunk en route by American submarines. Saito organizes the island into 4 defensive zones, relying on rugged terrain and camouflaged bunkers. The plan is simple: hold the beaches, then counterattack with the 9th Tank Regiment and destroy the landing force before it can consolidate. Meanwhile, Tokyo launches Operation A-Go. The first mobile fleet, Japan's remaining carrier force, will strike the American invasion fleet in a decisive naval-air battle. It's a desperate gamble meant to change the tide of war. But Saito knows the odds. His message to Tokyo is grim. We shall become the bulwark of the Pacific, and with 10,000 deaths, hope to earn imperial favor. At dawn, the largest naval bombardment in the Pacific so far begins. Battleships, cruisers, and aircraft batter Saipan's western coast. towns like Garapan and Charan Kanoa are obliterated. Bombers drop white phosphorus on sugarcane fields, attempting to clear hiding spots. But the Japanese are dug in deep in caves, ravines, and concrete bunkers. Much of the shelling misses. At 8:40 a.m., the first wave of Marines hits the water. 700 landing craft and LVTs surge toward the beaches. Behind them, a second wave carries amphibious Sherman tanks. Then things go wrong. Unpredictable tides push the 2nd Marine Division north, causing units to land at the wrong beaches. Gaps open in the line. Traffic jams develop. LVTs crowd together under enemy fire. Camouflage mortars and artillery, spared from the bombardment, open up with devastating effect. And yet the Marines keep coming. Within 20 minutes, the beachhead is secured, but the cost is high, especially for officers. Units are disorganized, scattered, struggling through rocky and swampy terrain. At Afetna Point, Marines encounter stiff resistance. Japanese defenders exploit every crevice, every cave, every patch of jungle. Many refuse to surrender, fighting to the last bullet. By nightfall, the Americans are well short of their objective line. The Japanese prepare for a counterattack. And the horror is only beginning. At 3 a.m. on June 16th, just hours after the chaotic day landings, the defenders strike back. In the moonless dark, Japanese infantrymen swarm toward the American lines, some in loose formations, others advancing behind women and children, used as human shields in a desperate and horrifying tactic. But the Americans are ready. Artillery, tank fire, and naval guns open up. Star shells light the sky like a false dawn, and what was meant to be a breakout collapses into slaughter. Hundreds of Japanese fall, and for every inch the attackers gain, they pay in blood. Yet still, they come. In one night, the Japanese throw nearly a regiment at the Marines, but they gain nothing. At dawn, the beaches are littered with bodies. Some American units have suffered grievous losses, but the beachhead holds. The next day brings something far more dangerous: tanks. General Saito unleashes the 9th Tank Regiment 44 tanks, many of them Type 97 Chiha mediums supported by infantry riding on top, in a desperate bid to crack the American lines. It is the largest tank-on-tank engagement of the Pacific War. But the assault is poorly organized. The tanks come in columns, forced by terrain into predictable paths. American M4 Shermans, dug-in anti-tank guns, half-track mounted bazookas, and even naval gunfire unleash a withering defense. One Japanese tank commander later recalled, "Most of the infantry on our tanks were killed or simply abandoned us. Our shells bounced off the Shermans like baseballs." By the end of the attack, 24 of 44 tanks are destroyed. The infantry, caught in the open, is shredded. The Japanese have lost their armor, and with it their last realistic hope of pushing the invaders into the sea. With the beachhead secure, the 4th Marine Division advances eastward, while the 2nd Marine Division pushes north. By June 18th, the Americans achieve a strategic breakthrough, cutting Saipan in half and isolating Japanese forces on Nawan Point to the north. Meanwhile, the 27th Infantry Division, newly landed, captures Aslido Airfield, giving the U.S. its first usable airstrip on the island. But the island is not yet secure. The Japanese still hold the high ground Mount Tapochau, Death Valley, Hell's Pocket, and the infamous Purple Heart Ridge, so named for the number of casualties it claims. Progress is slow and costly. Some American units begin using oxen, commandeered from local fields, to pull ammunition and water through the mountainous jungle terrain. Even for veteran troops, this is a new kind of war, close, chaotic, and without front lines. While the battle rages on Saipan, Japan's navy makes its move. On June 19th, Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa launches Operation A-Go. Over 450 carrier-based planes, plus land-based aircraft from nearby islands, surge toward Task Force 58, the powerful American carrier group. Ozawa believes he can destroy the American fleet with a single decisive blow. But the Americans are ready. In what becomes known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, Modern U.S. aircraft, especially the F-6F Hellcat, shred Japanese formations. For every U.S. plane lost, the Japanese lose 10. Over 300 Japanese aircraft are destroyed in one day. U.S. submarines sink the carriers Shokaku and Taiho. The carrier Hio follows 2 days later. When the battle ends, the Japanese Navy loses 3 of its last operational carriers, hundreds of irreplaceable pilots, and any hope of regaining air superiority. Ozawa retreats. Saipan is lost at sea, even if not yet on land. With Japanese naval support shattered, the defenders on Saipan fight alone. Now begins the push north into the interior mountains and ravines that form a natural fortress. The Americans call them Death Valley, Hell's Pocket, Purple Heart Ridge. Fighting becomes cave to cave, often hand to hand. The Japanese refuse to surrender. And when Marines flush them out, more often than not, they detonate grenades, killing themselves and sometimes their own wounded. American troops adapt. Satan flamethrower tanks, modified M3 Stuarts with pressurized napalm tanks, are brought forward. They send jets of superheated flame up to 80 meters, engulfing caves and bunkers. Survivors suffocate. Stone walls glow red. Screams echo across the cliffs. Code talkers, specially trained Native American Marines, provide fast, encrypted radio communication using the Navajo language, cutting response time from 30 minutes to 20 seconds. Still, the terrain favors the defenders, and casualties mount. General Holland Smith, frustrated by the 27th Infantry Division's slower pace in the west, relieves its commander. Critics say it's unfair that the 27th faces tougher terrain and more concentrated resistance. But Smith demands momentum. By July 7th, it is clear to General Saito that the battle is lost. He issues a final message. Whether we attack or stay where we are, there is only death. However, in death, there is life. That night, in the darkness before dawn, the Japanese launch one of the largest banzai charges of the Pacific War, up to 30 men, many without weapons, some wielding bayonets, others wooden staves. They overrun 2 U.S. battalions of the 105th Infantry, capturing artillery positions, swarming command posts, bayoneting the wounded. American units fall back. Some soldiers swim out to sea to escape. Then comes the reply. U.S. artillery fires 2 700 shells in an hour. Naval guns join in. Tanks roll into the valley and fire point blank. At daybreak, the field is soaked in blood. Over 4,000 Japanese lie dead. Some were soldiers. Some were coerced civilians. Most were never going home. Saito is not among them. He had committed ritual suicide before the charge began. By July 8th, Japanese organized resistance has all but ceased. But the killing does not. What remains on northern Saipan is not a military force, but a shattered society. Thousands of Japanese civilians, women, children, the elderly have retreated into the cliffs and caves above the sea. Many are starving. Others are wounded. Some are armed. And nearly all have been told the same lie. Japanese propaganda, reinforced for years, warns that Americans are monsters, that they torture prisoners, rape women, and slaughter civilians. To fall into American hands, they are told, is worse than death. Some civilians carry grenades. Others have been handed handguns or knives. A few are simply given orders to jump. At Marpi Point and Banzai Cliff, entire families throw themselves into the ocean below. Mothers clutching children, elderly men, teenagers, hundreds leap to their deaths. American loudspeakers with Japanese interpreters and captured civilians pleading for surrender echo across the cliffs, but most ignore them. The Americans watch in horror. Lieutenant Lewis Myers, a Marine officer, later recalled, "We knew we would find civilians beyond the beaches, but we did not count on meeting them in the midst of battle. Throwing grenades at Japs is what you were there for. But you hate to find babies in the same holes and caves." Some Japanese officers force civilians to commit suicide, threatening them if they surrender. Others shoot those who try. The lines between soldier and civilian blur into ash. This is not just battle. This is psychological warfare on a scale few had imagined. After 24 days of the most intense fighting yet seen in the Pacific, General Holland Smith declares Saipan secure on July 9, 1944. Over 100 Americans are dead. 0 wounded. Another 335 missing. The Japanese losses are staggering. Of 600 Japanese soldiers, only 921 are taken alive. Over 0 die in combat, caves, or ritual suicide. Nearly 0 civilians perish, many by suicide or coercion. About 700 civilians are interned in U.S.-run camps. In one grim count, U.S. forces note that over 0 bodies remain trapped in collapsed caves, unrecoverable. One Japanese officer, Captain Sakai Ba, refuses to surrender. With 46 men, he retreats into the mountains. They continue guerrilla resistance for more than a year, surrendering only in December 1945, 4 months after Japan's formal surrender. Within weeks, the lessons of Saipan are applied again, this time on Tinian and Guam. On Tinian, the Marines fake a landing at the main Japanese defenses, then strike elsewhere, flanking the garrison. Fire support from Saipan and naval artillery is coordinated with unprecedented precision. The terrain is flatter, and logistics improve, but resistance remains fanatical. On Guam, jungle terrain and harsh weather slow the advance. But American forces adapt. Amphibious vehicles are upgraded. Close air support from Saipan-based aircraft, now including napalm bombs, help break through. Once again, mass suicides among civilians haunt the campaign's final days. Once again, the Americans are left not with triumph, but with trauma. The capture of Saipan changes the Pacific War forever. From airstrips on a Slido field, B-29 bombers begin launching long-range bombing missions against Tokyo, including the devastating firebombing campaigns in 1945. The Japanese government is rocked. For the first time, the homeland itself is within reach of American air power. In Tokyo, Prime Minister Hideki Tojo is forced to resign. The illusion of invincibility has shattered. Japan's senior military command knows the war cannot be won by conventional means. And still, they do not surrender. Historians like James D. Hornfisher argue that Saipan introduced the United States to total war in the Pacific, not as a concept, but as a lived experience. There was no explaining away what thousands of Marines had seen with their own disbelieving eyes. In the Marianas, the ritual suicides, the brainwashing of civilians, and the murder of the unarmed shaped the war's final year. The will to win totally and without restraint was renewed. From this point forward, the battles become even bloodier. Peleliu, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and looming behind all of them, the prospect of invading Japan itself. Saipan was not the final battle. It was the battle that changed what finality meant. Here, among the cliffs and caves, Americans learned that this war would not be won simply by strategy or superiority. It would be won or lost in the minds of men who had been taught since childhood that surrender was worse than annihilation. Saipan broke the defensive line. It broke the facade of Japanese invincibility. But in the process, it broke something else. A wall between civilization and barbarism. A line between soldier and civilian. A belief that war could ever be fought with limits. In the ashes of Garapan and the cliffs of Marpi Point, one question still echoes. What do you do when your enemy chooses death over defeat? And if that choice becomes normalized, what might you choose in return? If you found this story as haunting and important as we did, please subscribe to Legacy Files for more forgotten moments of history brought to life. What moment in the Pacific War do you think deserves to be remembered more deeply? Let us know in the comments.